About 1910, modern science became aware of the endocrine system. This does not mean they had not known about it before, but it had remained a comparatively quiet, dignified part of our anatomy, and was enjoying that exclusiveness and seclusion which the body seems to prefer. Then all of a sudden, glands began to be very important. And in the 20 years following 1910, the gland concept became high fiction. It was something like spaceships in the 50s and 60s. Almost anything that you couldn't understand or you couldn't explain was a matter of glands. Furthermore, a highly evolved technique for investigating glandular function and glandular structure began to appear. Scientific papers were numerous. A group of scientists who called themselves endocrinologists appeared in the field of medicine, and we had almost the equivalent of the modern psychologist and now the modern exponent of wonder drugs. As always, man just went to excess. This does not mean that valuable information was not gained. It does mean, however, that there was not adequate criticism, very little basic understanding, and practically no basic interest in the glandular problem except on the purely physical level. We had much discussion of glands and rejuvenation. We had glands advanced to explain the personality problems which are now in the province of psychology. In those days, a man was what his glands were. And whatever changes occurred in his life or personality or appearance, these changes were basically due to glands. One problem that confronted the endocrinologist from the very beginning was that one gland, possibly the most important of all, just simply refused to reveal its secret. And for the most part, the condition is the same now, although a good many years have passed. The pineal or pineal gland, either pronunciation is correct, located in the central part of the brain, still remains the mystery gland of the human body. We sense, at least we think we do, that this gland, as long as it remains the most mysterious, is in all probability the most important. There is talk about this being the master gland of all, but it simply remains, even today, so mysterious, so difficult to work with, that comparatively little important information has been accumulated about this gland. The others have given up some of their secrets at least, and we do know what we suspected from the beginning, that they were there for a good reason. Nature does not put anything into the human body without a purpose. And man can take very little out of the human body without getting into some kind of difficulty. The various glands, tied together into a kind of pattern, certainly were focal points for the distribution of important secretions that affect health and well-being and contribute to a mysterious chemistry within the body. a chemistry which has as its essential purpose the maintenance of the equilibrium of function. The glands, therefore, act as regulators, distributors, integrators, organizers. And in their natural and proper functions, they are certainly of the utmost value. Yet with this general concept, we followed along the old accustomed way, which we are still following, to try to find out how we could influence these glands, how through various procedures we could become masters of their functions, so that we could direct, amplify, or reduce these functions by various scientific means. Here again, some definite good was achieved. And there are persons alive today in relatively good health who would not be here if it had not been for the endocrinologists. Sometimes we suspect, however, that there are some absences from among us that might be attributed to the same cause. So we are not certain that we are in the presence of a complete and undoubted blessing. The difficulty seemed to be in the early area of research, that it was all carried on by this splendid and brilliant group of materialists who could conceive of nothing of importance except physical symptoms and physical syndromes of one kind or another. To these people, the glands were a new way of trying to bring health to man by merely perpetuating the functions of his body. It was assumed that if you can save the body, you can save all. That if you can keep the body alive, the individual is alive. Here again, there is a broad point of doubt, because there are many people whose bodies are undoubtedly functioning, and that is about all we can say for the individual. We were not at that time very much interested in something that has later gained in fascination, namely the problem of the extrasensory gamut in human consciousness. If we had been interested at that time and a little more sympathetic, endocrine research might have had a far happier, more brilliant existence. This does not mean that the subject is dead. It is far from dead. Work is continually going on, but it does not have the hypnotic fascination that it had in the 30s and 40s. It is now moderating into a general program in which the glands are included with other subjects as well worthy of further thought. We do not have the mania on glands that we suffered from at that time. If this mania had become more aware of the large picture or total subject, a very great deal of progress might have been accomplished, and it is even possible that at least one world war could have been prevented if we had really understood the glands of the human body. But we did not, and we were contented merely to search for means of treating immediate problems. Among the valuable byproducts of this research, undoubtedly, was research into the problem of diabetes and the development of insulin therapy. This is the type of thing which may be pointed out as the best that was achieved. There is much more, however, to this great problem than the correction of physical ailments. Unfortunately, however, the public mind follows the scientific bent, and most people are far more interested in obscuring symptoms of existing troubles or of hopefully looking toward the remedying of some physical situation than they are in the search of the larger verities of human existence. So both supply and demand kept the entire research into the gland field largely on an objective physical level. Today we are probably more aware than ever before on a scientific level of the relationship between what we term consciousness and body. Now, of course, to the scientist, for the most part, consciousness is still a physical term. Mind is only a condition of matter. And in this thinking, we cannot entirely escape into the freer atmosphere of larger thinking. Still, however, we do have a new perspective, and that is the perspective of a person in a body. And we begin to realize that in some way this person must operate through the body which it inhabits. Therefore, all areas which may have a bearing upon this are becoming increasingly important to our thinking. The great French scientist whom we refer to in our book, philosopher-scientist René Descartes, was one of the first to express a series of rather noble thoughts bearing upon the relationship between consciousness and body. He declared that the anima, or soul, certainly operated through the whole body, through all of its substances, its organs, its propensities, and its functions. But although this could be rather immediately accepted by the thoughtful, there was another, more advanced question. If this operation was general throughout the body, there must be a controlling or directing center. Functions of all kinds arise from certain basic energy poles or fields within the body. Therefore, if the body is all responsive to soul, then there is this implication that there must also be a particular part of the body which is most particularly sensitive to soul. That there must be a headquarters, so to say, for this vast field operation. And it was Descartes' opinion that the pineal gland in the brain was this controlling center. He held this after a great deal of thought and consideration. He studied all of the principal centers of the body, the organs, the nervous system, the arterial system, and he finally concluded that the larger and more massive structures could not be the controllers, but rather were the large reservoirs through which these controllers operated. That in all probability the controlling power would be posited in a comparatively small and sensitive area, just as, for example, the very fact that man is alive is due to a very small and important area at the apex of the left ventricle of the heart. The area involved is probably not much more than the size of a small bean, yet this is a controller, a very important dynamic. And if anything happens to this one controller, the rest of the body ceases to function. Descartes, continuing his analysis, came to the conclusion that in the brain there was an unpaired organ, that instead of the organ being polarized or with two essential parts corresponding to the right and left sides of the brain, there was suspended almost in the middle of the brain, suspended in a manner in which it was capable of motion within the brain itself, a comparatively small and mysterious body which resemble perhaps a small pine cone, and that this mysterious body, with an independent motion, held in position only by certain arteries and veins and nerves, was, in his mind, the most likely organ or center by means of which consciousness was able to impinge itself upon the body as a living structure. Therefore, that life came essentially from the heart. But from this other center came the power which transforms a living thing into a thinking, conscious being. He probably, Descartes, was not merely conjecturing, not in the ordinary sense of invention. He was a very thoughtful man, a very widely read man, and a great student. There is no doubt in the world that he was well acquainted with the religious, philosophical, and scientific thoughts of ancient peoples. And while perhaps he did not have available as large an area of research as we have today, he had enough to convince him that throughout ancient religions and mystical philosophies, there was a lore or legendary by means of which the isolation of the area which he selected would be natural, reasonable, and probable. Perhaps Descartes did not even consciously do this, but out of his vast background, this thinking was almost inevitable as a subconscious process in himself. From the very earliest time, men have used the concept of the I, in this case E-Y-E, as a symbol of consciousness, of internal awareness. In India, an extra eye, a third eye, is placed on the forehead or higher upon the head of a deity to indicate, one would say, a power of superior sight, knowing, or insight. In the religious mysticism of Christianity, the head itself is surrounded by the nimbus of sanctity. Now, Descartes was a Roman Catholic, and therefore it is quite reasonable and probable that he was aware of the ancient symbolism associated with the canonization of a saint. Now, all through art, not only Christian art, but also Buddhist art and the arts of other Oriental peoples, sanctification is artistically presented or represented by adding around the head of the person a halo. In the development of the idea of canonization, developed quite a science of halos. All halos, aureoles, and similar luminous envelopes or surrounding light patterns are according to certain rules or designs. If you study ancient art, you will see, for example, that the persons of the Trinity, representing the Godhead, if personified, are usually given a certain kind of halo. That the halo of Christ is different from that of any of his apostles, and that the halos of saints are again different from those of angels, archangels, or other so-called celestial beings. Descartes was undoubtedly aware that if he took the halo around the head and regarded it as an area or a circumference, and he placed a compass so that he could draw this halo, which the artist placed around the head, that the central point of his compass, upon which he was to base the circumference, would lie in the head or approximate the position in the skull of the pineal gland. Therefore, that this luminosity was radiating from a center almost in the exact middle of the brain. Now, this luminosity we conceive of, probably, as being simply an art symbolism. And I think certainly it would be so regarded by most scientists. At the same time, these symbols are archetypal. They go back to a very ancient pattern in human thinking. Therefore, I don't believe that we can simply assume that these symbols are arbitrary. Rather, the ancient attempted to indicate by the halo or aura around the head a state of sanctity. He did not put this aura somewhere else. Strangely enough, he did not put it around the heart. Sometimes, of course, he will make a larger halo. And in Eastern, particularly Buddhist symbolism, it is quite common to find a double halo. One obviously from the heart, the other from the brain. These two halos form a very pleasant artistic design and are noted in the shrines and images of many of the Buddhistic divinities. However, the halo around the head is derived from rather ancient thinking and from a still older patterns of belief or attitude. In the Egyptian religion, for example, we find a definite use of a peculiar kind of ornament that is placed on the exact crown of the head, a tiny little mound-like structure resembling a tiny beehive. And on the top of this is placed, usually, a conventionalized lotus blossom or lotus branch. Now, we say branch, fully realizing that that is not the way we generally recognize a lotus. But in Oriental art, it is usually a peculiar type of hybrid in which the lotus symbol is combined with a type of stem and leaf that suggests the acanthus rather than the lotus itself. Now, in this particular case, the deceased person passing into the underworld has this peculiar device fastened to the top of the head. The deities involved are frequently ornamented with crowns or symbols. And these symbols include a mysterious something resembling a kind of antenna placed in the top of the crown of the deity, approximately in the same relationship as the feather in the hair dress of the Indian medicine priest. Now, in American Indian lore, the war chieftains always wore the bonnet. This was a circle, usually, of eagle feathers, forming a very elaborate headdress. This bonnet often also included an appendage of more feathers down the back until perhaps almost reaching the ground. But a mystic, a medicine priest, or a holy man could not wear this bonnet. That was the bonnet of the war chief. The symbol of the holy man was a single feather rising directly from the top back of the head, exactly where, if the stem of the feather continued into the head, we would assume the pineal gland to be. This was a sign of divine protection. It was a sign of dedication to God. This feather, by the way, served a number of protective purposes. For in the old tribal warfare, the chieftain with the war bonnet was always vulnerable. Anyone who wanted to take a shot at him could do so. But it was very bad taste to shoot the man who had one feather in his hair, because it meant you were shooting a priest. Therefore, normally, no one attacked him. And actually, he never carried arms himself. He was sacrosanct. He was set apart. And to injure the agent of the deity was a very serious offense.